So Sarah, you're part of this history. You were part of this world of New York in the late 70s, early 80s. You made your first film, the early 80s fiction feature film, and you've made other fiction feature films. What made you want to tell this story?
I spent many years trying to get films financed, narrative films, and many of us have the same story. And I went over to my friend Alexis Adler's house, who's in the film. She's an embryologist and a scientist, and we all knew she lived with Jean-Michel from around 79, 80. She had a mural over her bed, and her bathroom door was painted. And it was right after I went over for a cup of tea, right after Sandy had hit the Lower East Side, and it flooded it. And she suddenly remembered after 30 years that she had put away all these drawings and pieces of paper that Jean-Michel had left at her house, and she was worried about them. They were in a bank vault under in the basement, and they couldn't find her index card at first, and they finally found a handwritten index card. It had been so long since she had checked out where it was or anything, so when I went over for the tea, she had just gone with her daughter and brought it out of this bank vault, and it was over 60 drawings, writings, and 150 photographs she had taken of him. And when I saw it all, I was like, oh my God, this is not only a window onto him, but it's also a window on New York City at that time. And I was so afraid. It was such a beautiful, because he was so transient at this time that very few people kept a large body of work like she had kept. And she really kept it as a keepsake, not for any financial reasons or anything, just because she adored him. And then she suddenly remembered she had a box of clothes that he had painted. And I remember saying, well, it must have been like living with an elf. You wake up and everything's painted. So when I saw it, and then I was afraid because she wanted to take the mural off the wall because she was on the top floor of the same tenement they had lived in, and it was starting to get damaged, and she was going to sell it piece by piece in order to preserve it and to preserve the mural, particularly, well, everything. And but fate had it that it all stayed together ultimately. But so I felt I wanted to buy a camera to record her collection, and then it just sort of turned into something. It just started turning into, because I thought it was going to be about a 20-minute poem, and then it turned into something else.
I mean, you really made a dedicated effort to talk to lots of people in there. So at some point, it must have turned into something else where you were, going out and interviewing all these people.
Well, that's the beauty of documentary too. Is one person leads to another person, and because he really touched. I mean, more people have come up to me since that I didn't have in the movie, but I did keep it just between the years 78 and 81, because after that, everything changed in New York. Everything changed in his life, and that was the period that interested me because so many people young people are so curious about where he came from and how he developed as an artist. And I just think I discovered that he sort of sought out his own university of people, because most of the people he was hanging out with were 4 years older than him, or like the collab people were even older, 7 or 8 years older. And he was absorbing information from them. And he really loved celebrating ideas, and that's clear in his work too.
We don't hear a lot about his family in this film. What kind of contact did you have with them, or how did you think of them as fitting or not fitting into the story?
Well, who in their 20s even thinks about their parents and their families? It was like we didn't have families. We didn't talk about our families. It wasn't about our families. It was about our new family, our new tribe that we were forming as kids.
Well, what was the first time you met Jean-Michel? Do you remember that?
I think it might have been the incident with I used to see him around, maybe, I'm not sure. Because you would see him everywhere, It may have been with the flower, I may have seen it, I saw him before that, but I don't remember.
And what was your own experience of coming to New York City and being part of the scene?
Well, I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, and my dad commuted to the city. And I always knew, you had the shadow of the city, and I always knew I was going to live in New York City, and I was going to live in a tenement apartment, and nobody was going to mess with me when I was a kid. I just always had a love affair with New York. I was born in New York. I was born in Stuyvesant. When I was little, we were in Stuyvesant town, and then the city was quite dangerous then, and my parents moved out to the suburbs.
So making this film today, when New York is a very different place, did that cause you to reflect in a different way about that period?
Well, it was interesting. I showed the film at the New York Film Festival, and a lot of the people involved with the film who gave me work and stuff, I invited them to the festival, and nobody remembered how bombed out the city actually was, and it stirred everybody's remembrances. And also there was a kind of, because it was so dangerous, you had to be very, you had to observe everything. You had to be very, so you had an almost street antenna of danger. And I remember my hair, I cut my hair very, very short so I could look like a boy, and I was at graduate school at NYU, the film school, and it was on 7th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues. And I'd have to walk down the Bowery at night. I would edit at night and things like that. So I just didn't want anybody to mess with me. So
you cut your hair for that reason?
Yeah. So I just looked like a boy and looked really androgynous, and and it was very punk. Like everybody was cutting each other's hair and stuff. But it was also a safety factor.
We can take some questions. I've got a microphone here if you want to come down, or you can raise your hand and I can call on you and take a question from your seat. Don't be shy. Take questions. I know there's some. Yeah, go ahead.
Why don't we hear his voice at all?
So we don't hear his voice in this. What?
Well, one of the ways I wanted to approach the film was that him as a ghost, sort of floating through, and there isn't audio of him at that time. That was 78, 81. So.
Even in the interviews and the public access or whatever it was?
Not really. He was pretty quiet, and it didn't seem appropriate to me. It seemed, I really just wanted him to be sort of phantom-like.
So you talked about how you started with this treasure of previously unseen photographs. You collected material from lots of sources here. What was that process like?
Again, this film, I feel like it was made by so many people, because it was almost like our old community coming together, because I was a witness. Everybody was very helpful, even if they didn't know me personally, were very helpful in giving me archives. I mean, it was quite actually an incredible, moving experience, how generous everyone was. And when the film opens the weekend of May 11th, on May 13th, there's going to be we put Carla McCormick, Marianne Unforton, and Hal Gallery on 1st Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues. They're having an exhibit of many of the artists who gave me work in archives.
That's great. Was there anything that you remember uncovering and being so happy that you had?
Well, I totally forgot I shot the Max Roach and Fab Five Freddy footage. I found that in my office. And I had been asked by Nan Golden to be her assistant. She was shooting them for a Vanity Fair story, and she asked me to be her assistant. I brought my Super 8 camera, and I shot them, and I found, that I had totally forgotten about it. So that was great to uncover.
Yeah. Question number 2.
Yeah. Would that scene have been as potent without the drugs?
Well, would that art scene have been as potent without drugs?
It's hard to tell. It's so much part of the scene.
Would anything?
Yeah, it was, it was so romanticized, drugs, because you'd see, William Burroughs used to walk by my house. He wrote Chunky, and he'd write, and he was a myth, and he'd walk by in a 3-piece suit, and he'd have a cane, and he knew his cane was really a sword, and he had a derringer in his belt, and it was so, the drug culture was pretty mythologized at that point, and I was talking to Fab Five Freddy earlier today, and we were talking about how, there were like, the way they gave out drugs so freely, it was pretty suspicious, trying to get rid of us and everybody else around us. And in a way it was it started out as a party and a social thing, and then it, became something else. But we lost a lot of people. And also at that time, we didn't know about AIDS at that time either. People were dying from this weird disease that didn't have a name until I don't think it had a name till 82 or 83.
Question back there.
Mine's less of a question and just a compliment. I just really enjoyed it. I had the pleasure of editing Downtown 81, so seeing the footage and all that. And I love what you just said now about the ghost. Like, you don't really hear him, and like I felt like I was also missing like in that film too. But just your choices. I mean, we had so much to work with and not to work with. But I really just thank you for taking us back there.
Well, thank you for your work on Downtown 81.
Oh, thank you. Did you work with Mary Paul at all? Or?
Yeah. Mary Paul was very helpful, and Glenn O'Brien. He was like a bridge to so many things: art, music, fashion, and he helped Jean-Michel so much. I could make a film about Glenn. I mean, he was an extraordinary person, and we lost him around this time last year.
Great. Thank you.
Question right here.
Why do you say 1981 was a turning point for the city? But why do you pick that year?
That Ronald Reagan came in, and suddenly, none of us were really, I was talking to Freddie today about it, like none of us were really thinking about making money or, we just wanted to kind of do our thing and get our signal out just with each other. And suddenly the real estate boom started, the art boom started. It just all became more, it all just started changing and getting more commercialized, and then crack, all of a sudden there was crack, which kills people even quicker. It just feels like it all started changing right then. It's hard to be specific, but it was, it's interesting because in '79 was very much what's happening now with the whole feeling like the Cold War is back. That was happening in '79 too, this sort of fearful world around us. But 81, and then after 81, it all sort of dissipated. Our community, because rents started going up, you couldn't survive the way we were surviving and working in like a Xerox shop or whatever. Just, you could pay your rent. My rent was $125 a month. I could eat pizza and pay my rent and make movies and.
Right. Thank you.
Question up there in the corner.
Hi, Sarah. In the corner or?
Yep, you.
Great. Based on your conversations with him and Jim and kind of where he was at, had he lived, what do you think would have been next for him? Would he have gotten into film work, collaborated with Jim maybe? Would he stayed as a more visual artist or expanded some?
I don't know. I have no idea. But he was so interested in so many different mediums. So who knows what would have been possible. But he was amazingly prolific. And work keeps turning up. He just never stopped working. He was really quite phenomenal. And it's funny, 2 days ago, an old friend of mine out of the blue just contacted me, and my friend Katie, and she said, "Oh, Sarah, I have 3 postcards of Jean-Michel's, and I was with him when, he sold his postcard to Andy Warhol, and, I used to date him in high school, and it was really weird when my mother walked in the kitchen, and there's this, naked guy with like a mohawk sitting in, looking through the refrigerator, and, there's so many stories. But I really don't honestly know where he would have gone from where he just gave us so much in such a short period of time.
You talked about the openness with which people helped you out and gave you material. It's one thing that's striking to me about that is today, obviously, Basquiat's work is through the roof, and the auction market and everything is very monetized about his legacy. And I wonder if that entered into how people dealt with you on this project at all.
No, I think people were really coming straight from their hearts in terms of that they wanted this story to be told about not only his world but our world. And I also feel like it's such an important story because we need people to form communities now more than ever. And I feel like the internet and I have separated people. And, that's March for Our Lives kids. It's like, you know, that's, the power is in this collection of people and ideas, and, you know, I'm a little suspicious of the whole iPhone thing. It's almost like a fascist thing of divide and conquer, you know, it's where we're, you know, and I was thinking about the March for Our Lives too, because when I was a kid, I was like 14, I lied to my mother, and I was very adamant against the Vietnam War, and I snuck, and Rennie Davis was he was gonna shut down the government, and I went down to Washington, I snuck down to Washington with a friend to protest, and I realized the Vietnam War was stopped by high school, college students, and people in their 20s. It wasn't older people, you know?
Okay, take a couple more questions. You up there?
I was just wondering, I really love the film and I'm a fan of his art. But what is his personality like? You see him as a ghost, but as a person, was he funny? Was he, you know, like he kind of flower and everything? But what was he actually like?
Well, he was very mischievous. I think Luke says it perfectly. He was very impish, and you know, he was sort of quiet and impish and mischievous and Radiant Child was a perfect, you know, Rene Ricard named him that, you know, and he glowed. He had a glow. And you know, and you know, it's just memory, so I that's about it. You know, everybody says it in the film, I think. They talk about it, like Felice, and, you know, he was a little bit of a troublemaker. You know, he was a kid. But, you know, everybody was very fond of him. And I remember shooting Permanent Vacation in John Murray's apartment, and Jean was asleep in a sleeping bag on John's floor. And we had to keep, he was sort of like the dormouse in Alice in Wonderland, you know, he kept kind of waking up, and then he'd go, we have to move you again, Jean, to get you out of the way of the camera. And he would sort of, you know, then he'd go kind of smile and go back to sleep, and we'd sort of drag him around the room. And I also sort of, I realized, this is a little later, I remember, I think it was his 24th birthday, we had just made Stranger Than Paradise, which I produced for Jim, and his birthday was in December, and he invited us to Mr. Chow's, and at the birthday was John Lurie and Tom Waits and his wife Kathleen Brennan and Andy Warhol and Wim Wenders, and I remember Jim looking at Tom Waits' and John Lurie's face and went, I have to make a movie with these two. Look at these mugs. This is incredible. And then about a month later, we went to an Italian film festival, and Jim met Roberta Benigni. And then he went, we stayed in Rome, and I think Jim wrote Down by Law in about 2 weeks after putting those three together.
Question right here.
How do you feel walking around the Lower East Side places like St. Mark's and Delancey and Tompkins and seeing like the current youth culture and like the ways they try to draw from these same movements?
So if you didn't hear, the question was, how do you feel when you walk around the Lower East Side today and see new youth movements who are, in some ways, are drawing from that culture?
Well, Delancey, I love Delancey Street. It's still a very alive street. I mean, St. Mark's is kind of...
Yuck.
Well said. And, you know, I love these kids who do this spring break art fair. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but it happens at the same time as the big Armory Fair. And they just started doing it in abandoned floors. They did it at St. Patrick's School. That's where they first started it when that became abandoned. And they invite curators, young, and actually all ages, but it's mainly younger curators, to come with their artists. And they each get a room. And they did it at the post office, 34th Street Post Office. All those floors were abandoned, and they did 2 floors on there, and they had, I think, 150 curators, 400 artists. And past 2 years, they did it at an abandoned floors of the Condé Nast building off of Times Square. And it's mobbed, it's all word of mouth. They haven't gotten, you know, they're slowly getting press and attention, but it's such a great feeling to be walking in there and see so many, like a place of so many ideas just exploding. And a place for people, like, you know, all different people who don't get recognized to to have a room and to express themselves. It's pretty terrific.
Okay, I'll take one more question right here.
Did you choose the music, or was it the music supervisor? Worked with a lot of those bands.
No, the editor and I chose the music, and the editor cut the movie to the music. So
Soundtrack album?
I'm hoping, but they keep saying, well, you can get it all on Spotify. I would love to have it in one place. I don't know how Spotify works, but.
Well, the film is going to open on May 11th. Any of you who want to keep this conversation going, I'm going to move over to the bar Opa on West 4th Street in Cornelia. It's just a block away. Make a left here and a left on West 4th Street. There's directions downstairs if you want to join us at Opa. I hope you get to come back later in the season of Stranger Than Fiction. Thursday we'll be here for Haiku on a Plum Tree, and we're here every Tuesday night. Thanks very much for coming. Thanks especially to Sara Driver.